Welcome to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. I'm DaRon.
And I'm Roniel.
So to start us off, would you do us all a favor, Roniel, and define and describe malware and some of the different major kinds of malware out there?
So malware is intrusive software that only goal is to damage or destroy computer systems. And there are different types of malware out there. And one could be viruses, which viruses have one job, and it's to destroy or damage your system and to infect as many files as possible. So it'd be successful at doing that or reinfecting the system. So worms, on the other hand, they are self-propagating and they actually can be used to execute a common vulnerability or a 0-day found in your system that you don't even know about. So they utilize that in worms, but worms self-replicate. So, and then you also have botnets. And botnets nowadays are basically a herd of systems that were either backdoored or maybe utilized from worms or viruses, and they're utilized to take over your system. So they use them as bots, and they can use those botnets to bring down a system using a distributed denial of service attack, or they can use that to sniff out credentials and sell them to the highest bidder. You also have Trojans, which also kind of has those same techniques where they're actually backdooring a system. Once you install the Trojan, it backdoors the system, and then it may utilize some dangerous functionality, maybe install keyloggers, drop other malware on your system to get credentials and sell them, or to blackmail you, to whatever the intent may be. You also have ransomware. Ransomware's whole objective is to encrypt your system, take your data, and get money from it. And more than likely, you should always suspect that even if you haven't backed up your data, even if you backed up your data, that they're probably going to expose your data either way it goes, whether you give them the money or not. You also have adware, where the intent of the attacker is to get more ads to pop up in your system and get you to click more ads in order to get more revenue from those ads. And not only that, they can also get you to install more malware in order to do more malicious things or get more data from you. 7 would be spyware. Spyware also encompasses those same things that we just talked about, those same types of malware, which could be also Trojans. Trojan could be a subset of spyware. Keyloggers are a subset of spyware. They're basically goal is to spy on you, to sniff out your traffic, sniff out your credentials, sniff out your credit card data, whatever's important to that attacker or the attacker that their goal or their intent is to do. 8 would be spam and phishing. So that may also, you know, they may also be your Nigerian scammers who are they're not good at hacking, so their goal is to spam you in order to get you um, to go to their particular site or drop more malware or to get your data or credit card information to get money also. It's all revenue. But they may utilize spamming users after they've infected this, a target or a user. They may utilize that spamming to spam other users to get more users infected in order to actually get more revenue.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting. So I think a couple of things that you brought up. First and foremost, there is a huge disparity between what you'll hear in the general white hat community as far as the names of these things happens to be, and then what you'll hear from your black or gray hat community. And there's a lot more complexity, and honestly, the white hat community never did a very good job of solidifying the definitions for these different things. Because you're right, Trojans, for all intents and purposes, your spyware is nothing more than a subset of Trojan horse functionality. Now, Trojan horses, of course, way back when, those were files that were dressed up like something beneficial or that you might be interested in, but they had malicious functionality. More often than not, it was designed to spy on you. And then spyware itself seems to have become a term used to talk about something for the most part that is corporate related, right?
Yep.
Not the same as adware. So,
Yeah, yeah,
adware, of course, that gives you all those annoying pop-ups and everything like that. Even when you're not browsing in your web browser, you've got these silly pop-ups. But
which
it,
could
please.
no, go ahead. Sorry, I was just gonna say that that's why I kind of didn't get into categories. I mean, there's a whole if we could be going for days for these different categories, even with adware, like you could kind of put them in a category. Well, it's probably not ransomware, but the scamming category.
Some of it
You
certainly
know,
can be, but you're right,
yeah,
scamming most certainly.
yeah. I mean, the whole idea is to be able to get them to click on these links, and maybe they go to a malicious site, or maybe I'm just getting profit. I'm trying to get as
Right.
much ad revenue as possible.
It is interesting because there is a huge gulf between terminology of these different groups, but it becomes more obvious that, like I said, I mean, in general, white hats have not solidified the terminology when you look at the different malware's name according to the different antivirus or anti-malware manufacturers. So if you look at Kaspersky's, for example, virus database as compared to that of McAfee or Avast, AVG, although AVG mostly runs in line with Avast, um, things of that nature, you'll notice that the malware has completely different names, but it's not just the names. They're oftentimes in completely different categories. One
Yeah,
entity decides to define it as a Trojan. Another decides to define it as this as a Trojan dropper. And Trojan droppers were an interesting term that they created when Trojans started morphing way back when, or so people would claim anyway, morphing so that when my Trojan horse came online, all it would do is suck down other malware from wherever it is I wanted. And so they came up with this term, a Trojan horse dropper or dropper or Trojan dropper, all of these different terms. And our industry never actually settled on what these things mean. And that's really, really obvious when you ask, well, is this a virus or is it a worm?
yeah. Um, which goes back to the function. There's no standard in malware analysis or malware period. When you think about it, and coming from that background and knowing how the underground world, or if you want to call it forms in the underground hacking versus the corporate or commercial world, um, they're totally different. Like as we talked about command and control servers, nobody says that. All right, that I like for me going over to a commercial world, listening in like a command and control server. What is that? Like, is this some military type of thing? Like, this is no command and control server. We don't have any commands and control servers running around here. And that is not a term that's normally used, underground. So, some of these terminologies are it doesn't make a lot of sense. I get it, but it doesn't make sense, especially when we're talking about droppers. Now, yes, Trojans were used that, but nowadays hackers are basically get you to go to a malicious site and then they'll just drop something. And then that usual payload, whether it's fileless, malware or not, will go through and drop other malware. They're doing other things. And then they might even have rootkits to hide what they're trying to do. So they can evade, antivirus. But nowadays, that's kind of the trend I'm seeing back then and what they were doing by getting you to execute a Trojan or a program that looked, uh, like it was an actual program. Like if I use, if you were downloading Putty, to use it for a Windows machine, you think that is valid without actually checking the hash and or doing a checksum on it, and then all of a sudden it's running a Trojan in the background, and you don't even know that it's been hijacked. So, I mean, nowadays it's just fooling people go to the link, and then all of a sudden they drop this particular malware, and then all of a sudden when you run it, it literally drops more malware. So, I mean, these terminologies are nothing to stand in. These terminologies is crazy. Because even then, like I said, coming from that background and then trying to learn all of these different things of what they're talking, I'm like, what are they talking about? What is this? And then if you look from the antivirus, if they are not communicating with the white hats
Right,
or to come up with a standard terminology so you know what the hell you're looking at. Like, I don't know what I'm looking at,
right.
you know? That's not what we call that.
Well, and that winds up creating quite an issue. It really does, because you'll see some of these certifications and exams out there that will swear up and down that they have the definition for worm versus Trojan versus virus, as if these things were, as if there were no overlap, and as if the industry had settled on something. And I think the suspicion is, by running around claiming that the industry has settled on something, you can force the situation. You can force them to come to a single unified taxonomy. But first of all, it hasn't happened yet. And secondly, the certifications, several of the major certifications differ wildly. And so you're left going, all right, first and foremost, in the wild, there's very little distinction between a lot of this stuff. Your ransomware spies on you, and it has spied on you for some time. Your Trojans spy on you, and they have spied on you for some time. All of the adware spies on you. Whether or not they admit that's what they're doing, they all spy on you too. So what exactly is spyware? What exactly are each of the differences that make up these things? And they act like it's cookie cutter, and it's not. The only thing is, you can sit there and clearly say, okay, well, a botnet has these features. A worm has these features. A worm is self-propagating. And even that is questionable. Is something that travels via email a worm?
Yeah. Doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be. That's exactly right. It can be a virus, and it gets very complicated, because even if that malware goes off and it scans your address book, grabs all your contacts, and shoots everyone emails, I mean, does that make it a worm? It just by itself created emails. Is it a worm, or is it a virus?
But then again, do people actually know what they're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Do they actually know what this stuff is? Because some people think they know what it is, but they don't. And then they overcomplicate something that's really
Right.
not that complicated at all. And when you think about in the malware community, and especially with malware development, it's most people I don't even think they even care whether it's a worm or not.
Right.
The whole goal is, does it do its job? What was your
Right.
intent? What were you trying to do? And the commercial world start calling these things what they are. Nobody said, "Oh, this is a worm."
Right.
It's going to replicate and keep going. It's going to keep replicating itself and keep going and keep going to each system and attacking as many systems as possible. And is that my goal? And back then, as a hacker, and this is where I get kind of in between, because I felt like back then hackers were more concerned with getting fame
Yeah.
than actually, doing or whatever their goals were, executing their goals, whatever that goal were. They were more, how do I get famous and attack as many systems so this worm can be on the top of the billboard or the top of the newspaper, front page newspaper. How did that matter? And I mean, what was the goal there? What was the mission? What were your intent? And a lot of times it wasn't really any intent, but just to make something that would destroy something. All right. And then now we're getting to the point where there are intent. There are goals if they're doing it that. Like I said, I haven't seen many worms, but if we're building malware, we're building for the intent to just do something to attack this particular thing, which we'll get into APTs, right? Well, we spent this much time actually researching about this host or our target, and then building something that specifically focus on that specific target. So things are just transitioned. But again, I think the spyware is just a fancy term that they slap together just to make it sound cool. When all in all of these all different type of malware does the same
Yeah.
functionality, same thing. Even with adware,
Yeah.
it hijacks your browser and it spies on you,
Right.
and it tries to see what you're interested in, so
Right.
it can get you to click on that and get more revenue, or get you to click on malicious things to do other things, and may lead to you becoming a what they call a zombie or a part of the botnet herd.
Looking at some of the tactics, I think a lot of what you're really talking about and what you're seeing is what happens when things go from people in the basement, so to speak, to commercial entities getting involved, organized crime getting involved, and of course, nation states getting involved. I suspect that if you actually were to plot it down in a timeline, you would notice that maybe things started to become, I'm going to say, more sophisticated, but that's not giving it much credit. But I'd like to give you a chance to talk a little bit about how you saw things going historically with regard to how complex, how well written, and things of that nature the majority of malware was versus maybe how it is today, and how much, if anything, has changed beyond perhaps some of the goals, for example, like you talked about with ransomware.
Yeah, so the malware doesn't seem to be, it's not too complex. It's really easy to write, and I don't think people understand that it's that easy to write. A lot of them are not even a lot of code, and depending on what they're actually writing or what language they actually choose to use. So with perspective, like I said, back then, the goal was to just destroy. Let's get my name into the paper and become the most famous hacker around my peers. I want to be the best hacker. Doesn't matter if I'm script kiddie or not, if I'm using some exploit kit or not. Let's get it out there. So nowadays, it is more goal oriented on having a goal and intent. Especially with ransomware, their goal is to infect as many machines and get as much money as possible. Of course, same idea with adware maybe, but depending on what that intent was. But their goal is to infect as many machines and get as many uh, people as they can to get more money. And their intent is that's what their intent is, to do that and then encrypt that data. And also maybe from the beginning, their intent is to expose that data, which they're going to do. If they get your data, more likely they're going to expose. You might as well get that in your head that you're probably going to be exposed. They're going to put that data out online, no matter if they give you your data back at all.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's
true.
something to note. But today's, today's thought is like, or the way things are going today is they're more focused on their goal and intent than they were back then. And then it's not just not to say that they're not still thinking, hey, I want to be the most famous hacker around my peers underground. And that might still be the intent, but it's more about money, which it should all, I think it always been about money, as you can see with the carding and the scamming. But you have two different sides, and it's depending on whether they're a nation state or they're just some hacker in their basement, some kid or teenager.
Right.
And as we define hacking, I don't know where the white hat, black hat, and gray hat things come from, as we all know. Of course, that was made to put a little bit of umph to it, but as we all know, that none of that matters. I mean, you can be 6 or 7 years old and get an exploit kit and start
Right.
hacking and doing malicious things, right? So doesn't mean that 6-year-old has an intent or even have a goal in mind. You just want to be the coolest kid on the block, right? So that has now changed. Now it's more goal oriented than it used to be. There's an intent for it. And back then it wasn't. Even for myself, like when I looked at that, it was like, hey, I just want to know how I could do some cool stuff and be the coolest kid on the block, but not thinking about the malicious thought behind it. I wasn't thinking malicious, but it's like, hey, everybody else is doing it. Just cool. Like, how do you do this? How do you have these superpowers, uh, that you always dreamed of having from the comic books? So this is what malware development or the malware community, like that's how I felt being a part of that, if trying to be a part of that community at that time. But again, going back to the subject at hand, is it's more intent and goal oriented than it used to be. So a lot of those things that you're going to see, and especially in the future, I think they're going to have more goal and intent. Now, has the code got more sophisticated? No, it's all the same stuff. Right? People are just reusing other code that was used from years and years ago, and just adding little tweaks to it nowadays. So it's all the same stuff. It's not really complicated. I think people are making it overly complicated. As we talked about the other day or before, a lot of the malware has a particular function, but it's hidden. So they'll give you all of this junk in the code to make the analyst look at other things than what is really going on in the code. So I can make several different junk functions that does absolutely nothing. It looks like it does something, but it does nothing. That's just to fool antivirus, to evade antivirus, and also fool the person that's actually going to be doing the analysis. So it makes it like it's complicated. It makes it look like there's 3,000 lines of code, and there might be only one function that really does one thing, and you're looking through all these lines of code of junk that does nothing completely, but you're missing the real intent of what they're trying to do. So it's just creative thinking. It's not really, complicated. And I think people make it, overly complicated because they think it's magical, or they don't really understand what malware purposes is.
Well, and it's interesting because, to give a good example, Stuxnet. Don't spit out your drink.
Yeah, yeah, it was coming.
Yeah, that's right. Stuxnet, everyone, you saw the press, etc., talk about, oh, it's so complicated. It's definitely nation state because it's so complicated. But if you ask any developer, if you showed them the code and asked them to look at it, I don't know of any developer who had been doing C or anything like that for even 5 years would possibly entertain the idea that there was anything sophisticated or complex about any of the code in question. It was actually not well written, and that actually tends to be the case with most malware.
Yeah, when you think about it, you don't have to be a developer to actually write malware. There's no specifications, there's no degree. You can just start writing code whenever you decide to. Like whenever you decide that you want to do this, it's not a standard to it. There's no, rule or breakdowns on how do you write malicious code,
Right.
right? Just like a
Right.
developer can't go, you can't go to school, become a developer, learn all these different principles and data structure and all that, and then try to apply them uh, in a malicious intent. Not every developer or individual can think that way. So there's no standard, and of course, it's going to always be poorly written because a lot of people who are writing code are not developers.
Yeah.
They don't know how to write code. But it doesn't take a genius to write something or break something,
Yeah.
or to write something malicious. It doesn't take a genius. You don't have to be a rocket science to go and break something.
Destruction is easy, right?
Yeah, it's easier to break than it is to fix.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing now. Like even back then, that you could jump into some code. If it's online, go look at the syntax, learn how to write code in these different languages, and then start going and putting things together. So like we said, viruses. If I wanted to destroy your machine, all I have to do is write a virus that literally may have one line, even if it's C, shell execute, boom, go delete this Win System 32 folder. Delete the bootloader, delete all that. Boom,
Yeah.
you open it, easy. That wasn't difficult.
Yeah.
And it's not well written, not well put together. It's not like they cared about, oh, let me go make sure that I have this space or tab, whatever, depending on what type of guy you are. I don't know if you're a tab or a space guy. You know how they have these issues.
I like
But
tabs.
yeah, yeah, me too.
That
Tabs are way better than
lets the
spaces.
individual viewing it sit there and adjust based on their own thoughts as to how much white space should be there. If I do spaces, then it's set in stone.
In my thought, why do I care?
Right.
Maybe it matters to somebody who's reviewing it, Of course, you don't want it to just be straight down and it looks horrible. You want some type of beauty to it. Of course, there's an art form to it, but and building malware, who cares about the
Right.
spaces, the tabs? Nobody cares. I am only trying to use this thing once.
Right.
Okay, then it's going in the garbage. Then I'm on to my next because what's the lifetime and your thought? And the way you see it, what is the lifetime of malware? How long do malware last?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would argue that assuming people actually used antivirus, you have just a few hours in most cases if you hit big organizations. Now, if all you do is a targeted attack, and that's actually one of the really interesting parts about a lot of this is, while it's safe to say that most malware is, I'm going to say, custom designed, and I don't mean that as in, they're sitting there with a victim in mind or anything, a specific victim in mind or anything like that. What I mean is, you go off, you write your malware, you then write another malware tool and another and another and another, in so much as they aren't, well, they have a basis in some other tool, because let's be honest, most of the time they're not starting fresh, right? It winds up just adjusting and tweaking whatever it is they're making for whatever their, as you said, goal is, whatever it is they're actually trying to do. So if you aren't specifically making custom malware for a given small group of people, you've got just a few hours, maybe a few days before it starts making its way to VirusTotal, to all the different antivirus vendors, and some of them put out new definitions every hour. Some take half a day, some take a day. So it depends, but definitely most malware should be crushed within just a couple of days.
Yeah, depending on like you said, what corporations or how far it gets.
Right.
So with that being said, then the malware that I created or someone created is not gonna have a long lifetime or life
Mm-hmm.
cycle or life. So I'm only gonna use it once.
Right.
So nobody cares. I could give a crap less about making it beautiful like you would if I was a developer
Right.
that's going to be used multiple by thousand and thousand of people
Right.
and more than once. It's not doesn't have a dying life cycle, a lifetime.
Right. It won't
So
last years.
it won't last years, but definitely that nobody cares about the way it's written. And as you can see with what was it, Black Kingdom?
Yeah.
Black Kingdom was definitely poorly written. It didn't care about, as your normal, virus or malware would do. It would go through and check what it infected, whatever, executable, and make sure that it append their whatever string that they use. Would say if I had my string was this is infected, I would go and infect that or append that to that binary, so I would know next time I go and check around at that when that malware is run or ran, that it actually is already infected. Well, it didn't care about that. It just continued to keep infecting and reinfecting over and over. So that was pretty poorly written. I don't think the author cared about that at all. But that is something, if you're a malware developer, that's what you think. Like, okay, I'm going to go through these different lists. I'm going to make sure that I check this. I'm going to make sure I check that and check this. But neither did they care. They didn't care about that. The whole goal was to get money and infect as many people as possible to get more money. So I don't really care. Like I don't care if it has a it has a checks in there, some try and check statements or anything, or I don't care about that. I don't care about no try and catch statement. I don't care about none of that. I don't care about any error logs or any of that. I don't care. I just want something that's going to get the job done and make me more money.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Error handling is generally not something you see, and when you do, it's very, very minor in almost all cases. which I guess should bring us to another point of discussion, another two. And that really comes down to, so as I suspect most people don't know, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had a lot of cryptologists and things of that nature, but especially mathematicians, just mathematicians in general, whether or not they were doing cryptography or any of that kind of stuff. You had a lot of them that were unemployed. And it was funny because as the different satellite states collapsed and new states rose in their place, and even as the greater Russia, so to say, wound up collapsing, these people found themselves out of business, well, out of work, I should say, right? So a lot of these guys had been employees of the state. And so organized crime over there picked up on the fact that, hey, we have all these guys who either know how to program or know cryptography. And they started hiring them and having them create malware and all this other stuff. And so you could get a very different flavor starting in the early 2000s, especially with malware. And that's actually where your ransomware starts coming out of, right? But the dynamics between what it is they were after as compared to what it is everyone else was after was completely different. And then you expand that a little further and you wind up getting botnets very soon after. Actually, botnets came after ransomware. Just the Western world doesn't generally remember that because your ransomware started in a completely different part of the world and focused strictly on your any operating system that was using Cyrillic. So initially it was focused really just on, I don't want to say continued dominance of the USSR because it's not what was going on. People may misconstrue it in that regard, but it was more, this is a culture and language we understand, so it's easier to exploit your own than it is to exploit and attack someone else in general. So we see botnets come out, and botnets actually have a very similar goal. At least I would argue they do at that high level, because what is your botnet going to go through and do? What if I have a botnet? What is it I'm really after, and then how do I make myself marketable?
Got a question for me?
It sure is.
I mean, it all depends. I think it all depends on what you're trying to do. Like, if I am trying to take down a company and that's my goal, then maybe I'm using that botnet for distributed denial of service. If my goal is to be able to control, a bunch of hosts and get data like spyware, as we talk, that functionality of getting credit card data, any data from them and then selling it on the black market without them even knowing, then maybe I'm using that because now I get a higher profit margin from having all of these resources and utilizing all these resources. Now I can sell it to the highest bidder and now they can control that herd. And again, you have those different functionalities that come out from what we were just talking about with spyware. You have those different functionalities. You could call a botnet all type of things. You can call it a Trojan. You can call it keylog or different stuff. It all depends on the person's intent. Again, which I
Right.
go back to intent. So
Right.
it's the same similar goal, depending on what they're trying to do. Now, I would have to say this goes back to when we were talking about our first segment, the things you should know. Now, if you think about malware developers and those that don't have that much experience in other areas, you see that it's not as sophisticated as you think it would be. Now, if you look at botnets, what is a botnet really is? What really is a botnet? Okay, a botnet to me is, if we go back to being a system admin, right, where I want to control as many machines as possible and push out updates. I want to push out updates to as many machines as possible. And I could be managing maybe 10 to 20, 30, 40 machines. Same idea with a botnet, right? I want to be able to control all of these hosts and send the same data to each host. Now, how can you do that? Right? That's the same using some type of bot.
Yeah.
So you have to know in order to be sophisticated, as you say, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think we were talking about the Soviet Union, which is where I would say I'm not going to say there still is overly complicated. It's not like the code is overly complicated, but that's where you
Yeah,
see
I
more
agree.
sophistication because a lot of these people have more experience in different areas, especially I'm sure in Russia. They have more experience. A lot of people that's writing malware have probably been developers and slash system admin or did different things. Like there's no way that if I was 6 years old, I would be able to create a botnet on my own without having any experience knowing the system, as you said. You just what we talked about in the first segment, you have to have different skill sets in order to be able to come up with these creative ideas. Yeah, I can think of things all the time, but that doesn't mean I know how to implement them.
Right.
So having that knowledge of the system and taking that creativity and putting it together, you can come up with something that seems sophisticated, but it's not new. It's not something new. A botnet is exactly what we just said. That is something I used in all of all my years of being in doing security administration or being a security engineer. I used those same tactics in order to be able to push out a configuration file. That's why we have Ansible and all of these Puppet and different systems. They kind of do the same thing. They utilize those, I think in Python, because I think if I'm not wrong, I think Ansible uses I think it uses Python, right? And I think Puppet uses Ruby, or it might be the other way around. But either way, they use a modular functionality called Fabric, or I think it's Fabricator or one of them. But it kind of does that, gives you that modular feel where you can actually talk to multiple hosts at once, but gives you that functionality. But I was using those same frameworks to do that same exact thing. Because at first I was building my own, and then I utilized those frameworks. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see that now. However, most botnets are written in C, and they're poorly written, by the way. They're horrible, and they're horrible to manage.
Yeah.
They're very, very. They seem very complicated when they're not, but they're really easy to build. It's not that hard. And literally, most botnets are. I think in C, I think the most I've seen is maybe 1,000, 2,000 line. Of course, it's C. What you could do in Python in a couple lines, and C it'll be millions of lines. But it literally wasn't that much going on. Right. So, and as with most of the botnets nowadays, you'll have your server that actually if I you'll have two different servers that I've seen. You have one server set up to do the scanning and the other server set up to actually host all of the bots. So the server that's doing the scanning will send that data to the other server, which will be hosting the bots, because you don't want them on the same server because it uses too much resource. And then it would just keep count of all of the resources you had. Now, after that, once you've got that server set up with all of your bots, then you would have another server that you would screen in on, or it could be that same server. I've seen people where they have multiple hosts, so they want that server wouldn't be taken down. Then they started getting more sophisticated, where they started doing more infrastructure things, where they'll start having redundant servers, so
Right.
redundancy.
Right.
So then you would use screen to screen in, or if you wanted to telnet, they had, of course, they're using insecure protocol,
Right.
but telnet into your host that was hosting the bots, and then you could utilize those bots to do whatever you wanted. But it literally was one line, like one big file of code, junk
Right.
file of code, and that's not good
Right.
from a development standpoint. That's not
Right.
efficient.
Right. Well, and I guess to that point, so something I've seen a lot online, there is a service called Malvuln, I believe, out
Yes.
now, where they publish a whole bunch of different malware vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities in malware. And it was interesting because I saw someone online complain about that. And it's this supposed security professional. And he's like, what are we telling them how to do it better now? Which to me shows how little this guy understands anything really about security. Because one of the most important concepts I learned very, very early on playing when I was young was if malware has a vulnerability and you have someone malicious, they can use that malware to hurt your system more. And everyone would say, well, why don't they use the malware itself? Maybe they don't have access to the malware. Maybe the malware requires authentication. Maybe the malware requires some, some system that it communicates with. Well, if I don't have access to that system, but I still want to use that malware, either one, to compromise your system myself, or two, to just piggyback off of and abuse it, every vulnerability I can get my hands on is going to help. It doesn't matter if it's a vulnerability in malware, or if it's a vulnerability in your operating system, or if it's a vulnerability in some other piece of software installed on your computer. A vulnerability is a vulnerability. And those vulnerabilities, those issues, can be leveraged by someone to attack your system. And I don't understand why this confused him, why he had issue with this. To me, it's so obvious. If you have insecure file permissions on malware, well, if I am a local user and I don't have access to some resource, but I can piggyback off of that malware, that's what I'm going to do. If I'm a remote user and I'm scanning for systems, I remember, it feels like early 2000s, there was a series of incidents where there was malware running around. In some cases, it was creating a botnet. In other cases, because it was different malware, it was just sitting there spying on people's computers. And other people wrote malware to hijack that malware and to change it, or to fix vulnerabilities in the operating systems of those systems that had been infected, and then shut off access to the malware, things of that nature. And in other cases, they were purposefully abusing vulnerabilities in the malware, in the existing malware, so that they could infect the system. And I think one of the biggest issues that our industry has seems to be a lack of memory. No one can remember a thing.
But the question is, did they even know it in the first place? Like, people don't think, and like you raised a good point, because a lot of the people that are, or most of the people that are actually writing malware, don't know anything about secure code. Like, it's bad that you're a security person that don't know anything about security. They don't care. So from a security perspective, if I'm a security person, which I am, like yourself, then I'm going to be looking for vulnerabilities in that. All right. But that may help me to figure out how to stop other people from, causing more havoc. Because if I'm an attacker, and say we're competing, back then attackers used to compete.
Yes, they did.
Say we're competing to, get some particular system or hack some particular company, and you have malware, a foothold already in that company. If I can find it and find a vulnerability in your code, then I can hijack that and take over that, because I already know you guys are not, or most attackers are not, writing secure code, or don't even know how to write secure code, and they don't care. They just want to write something that will get past any antivirus, evade them, and then get onto a foothold in that particular target system. So if I am really good at that, and I'm really good at spotting and knowing that, then it's easy for me to hijack. Especially if they wrote in the C and they're using, they don't care about dangerous functionality. So you have a buffer overflow there. Boom. There you go. Now, do I want to crash the system? Because now that may be, a ring of high alerts to anybody that's actually monitoring that system. So that might not be a good idea, but there are always other ways to break in.
That's exactly right.
I don't think people know about that. That's the difference. I don't think people really, maybe it's not all about memory, because most people may not know that. So they don't understand. And that's the problem with our industry. They think they know things when they don't. They can't admit when they don't know something. It's okay. You don't have to know everything. You're not going to know everything. Nobody's going to be in this world a true expert at anything. That's why we continue to keep growing and learning because everything changes. So I don't think they really understood, what they were talking about or understand the topic in general.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I really do. So to add on to that, it's it's funny because I don't think they also recognize the havoc that could be wrought by exploiting vulnerabilities in malware, or just by the fact that the malware itself is buggy. I mean, a lot of systems have been brought down by malware, just buggy malware. And that has been the case forever. Yeah, you're
Oh yeah.
laughing. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's true.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And the person who glorified itself. Oh yeah, I
I
killed the
meant to do
system.
that.
Look at all these systems. Yeah, I meant to do that, and you didn't meant to do anything. You didn't
Yeah.
even know. That's how we got fork bombs,
Yes.
right? I'm
Yes.
sure somebody was creating some simple malware and forgot to check their while loop. And all of a sudden you have an infinite loop. Now
Yep.
I'm just fork bombing the whole god thing system. So yeah, accident.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It is funny though. So going back to what we were talking about earlier, uh, if you really think about it, so looking at your ransomware, their big thing for some time, because initially they just encrypted all the data and then demanded you pay them to supposedly get access to it, which, by the way, you should never pay, because while discussing vulnerabilities in malware does not help them improve their code, paying them does, because now you're paying for development of the next version of your ransomware, which is only going to hit you harder. And that's exactly what they want. If you don't pay, they're not going to get much money, except by selling off what they get. And that was the big thing, was initially they would just encrypt everything. Actually, initially they screwed up and they weren't encrypting. They just told you they were encrypting. Then they then they figured out someone goofed. Speaking of functions that do nothing, and they're like, oh shoot, we forgot to actually hook in that function. Let's actually encrypt the data. So there was a bit of a learning curve for a little while with some of these developers out there, but they started to realize that most of the people just weren't sending them money. So what do? It's like with botnets, like you mentioned with botnets. Most botnets now have modules, so they'll steal all your stuff, and that has been the case for a very long time. But what you do is, well, I'm just going to ship all your data off to me, off to a server in the sky in another country. So I'll never be extradited. You'll never get your data back. And then, of course, I'm just going to sell it. I'll bundle it up and I will sell it. And it's funny because a lot of people don't recognize, but they get so much data from these campaigns now. Botnets, ransomware, et cetera, they get massive amounts of data. So all they do is run what are effectively fancy string searches, finds for anything that looks or smells like, a credit card number or a bank number or social security number, so on and so forth, anything that they might think is sensitive. And then it gets bucketed in one bucket. And they sell this stuff, and you'll maybe have thousands of records for just a few dollars. And it all depends, like with your credit card numbers, if it's a credit card that isn't set to expire for a long time, if it has high limits, all this other stuff comes together. But it's interesting because that's actually now where they make a lot of their money is, and that's botnets and a ransomware, is not necessarily in selling all of the data, but by selling just select bits or selling access to their stuff. So access to the botnet. I don't need to wreck your system, and I don't care what you do with it. I'm going to give you, you're going to pay for 2 hours on my botnet. I'm going to give you 2 hours. So my botnet size is going to dictate how much I can, as well as, of course, connectivity and things of that nature, but how much I can demand price-wise. But you couple that with being able then to also sell off people's data. being able to maybe, for example, let Nigerian scammers onto some of those systems in my botnet and steal people's bank data or transfer money. It winds up paying pretty darn well. Pays better
Yeah,
than you would think.
the biggest thing is that, and then as a malware developer, then my goal would be to get infect as many systems as
Mm-hmm.
possible. So I would be, profitable, because a Nigerian scammer is not going to just want to pick any botnet, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna want to pick the best and also the best infrastructure for that. The botnet you're buying, like it's very interesting. Like I said, they're actually trying. It's funny because I'm starting to wonder if they're going to actually start having their, as we were talking about, DevOps
Yeah.
type of environment where these things are set up, and they're starting to get to that point where you're getting more people that have more experience and setting up the infrastructure. Now, going off of that, since we're talking about botnets, and I'd like to have you piggyback on this because this was very interesting back in our younger days when I was seeing this stuff in the gaming industry. They do the same thing, except it's not selling data. It's more of selling time for booting people offline.
Right.
You give me, $20 for each hour, and
Right.
you can get this and utilize that. But now you have to have the best infrastructure. Because if this goes down, this person just paid you this amount of money. Same idea when you're talking about botnets that are stealing information. Same context. Like, other hackers are trying to get that too. They're trying to take over that botnet, so they're attacking their system. Do you have a good infrastructure? And am I getting my money's worth?
Right.
So you think about that into taking that into context also, that if you are the attacker and you're selling these things, yeah, you're getting a lot of money, but you have to be really, really good. Like your infrastructure and system has to be really top notch in order for somebody just to pay. Now, I'm not saying most people are not just going around paying anyway, but more than likely, if you want to get really good money, you have to have a good infrastructure, a good setup, so it wouldn't get taken down. Because all attackers are every day are not only trying to get into your system and take over your botnet, so they can control that and resell. So imagine you have a herd of botnets, and I'm like, wow, this guy has over 20 million infected machines,
Yeah.
and I only have tens of thousands. If I can hack in and get into your system, which I've seen a lot, just
Yeah. Yeah.
scanning and looking
Commandeer
around
mine.
around, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
people are taking over them and then reselling these,
Mm-hmm.
and then now you've lost your bot.
Yeah.
That's common.
Yeah, well, and that goes exactly back to what we were talking about earlier. That is perfectly exactly what we were talking about earlier. I mean, these guys, it is not this kumbaya environment. It is a money-making machine, and like any other money-making machine, profit reigns supreme, and they will do anything because there are no laws. It's not like they care about any laws. They will do anything to get more money. And if that's, me hijacking your botnet, that's what I'm going to do. But it's it's funny because these botnets have been misused quite a bit lately. People trying to do denial of service against, for example, major internet service providers, ISPs, and against major companies and organizations. And the reason why I say that's misuse is it's noisy. And so it actually ruins a botnet. A great way to lose your botnet is to sell time, rent it out to someone who's going to go try a distributed denial of service against Microsoft or against some massive government or network, because now it's burned. You just burned your botnet. And I hope those people, shouldn't say this, but I hope those people who built the botnets, who get them burned like that, recoup their money some other way.
Yeah, yeah. It Again, there's no honor
No,
amongst thieves. So,
no.
and that's something you also learn as being the attacker or the hacker, that you also have to learn to defend your your stuff.
Yeah.
So, when you think about it now, and this goes back to something I want to talk about also, is getting into this other question is, you as an attacker or a hacker, like, how do you learn this stuff? Like, people are like, I know that the industry talk about you need to know how to be able to defend, you need to know how to be able to, have good offense, also be, you know, offensive. But how do you learn that? And back then at those times, it was getting into malware. And I don't know how you may have got your start in particular, but most people got their start in trying to learn how to write these and do these things. So as a kid, you learn that, oh, it's easy to make this stuff, but you also have to defend your stuff because you have other attackers trying to compete with you. They're trying to take over your system so they can make as much money as possible also. So it's a doggy dog world. Like, and if you want to really be good, you got to be able to protect yourself at the same time as you're being offensive. You got to be defensive and offensive. Same way which you would be in boxing. If you have sucky defense, then you're probably going to get knocked out. But if you have good defense and good offense, you're going to be good. And you might not even have the best offense, but if you got good defense, you're going to be in good shape. Same way with hackers. If you want to protect your herd, you're going to have to be able to defend it. So I don't think people get that or think about that. That's how that really works underground. Like, there are every day somebody's trying to get into your system, and even in the gaming area. Like I said, I was surprised to see that in gaming that those same principles carried over. And then there were people hijacking other people's systems to take over their botnet to make money. And I'm like, we're making you're making money trying to boot people offline. I mean, I just find that kind of funny.
So much of this is international, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that
Everybody's
really,
doing it.
yeah, right. And that changes the game quite a bit. That changes the game a lot. So if you ever look at it, most of the people who are going to attack systems here in the United States are not going to be from the United States, and you will never get your hands on them. And I'm not saying you're wasting your time trying, but good luck. Whereas usually if you were in, say, Poland, most of the people attacking you aren't going to be Polish either. That isn't to say that there aren't Poles who would not be attacking you as well, but the vast majority wouldn't be, because most people who do this kind of stuff know well enough who they can attack with impunity. I'm not going to get extradited if I go after Russians or Chinese or people from some of these other countries like North Korea. But I will get extradited if I attack someone from the UK, and that does happen. So if I am intelligent, I'm not going to, as a US citizen, go after someone from the UK. And similarly, someone from the UK would be unwise to come after the United States. And that's why, if you ever notice, you'll see clustering. Now, of course, nation state stuff is different. I'm excluding them from all of that. But that is an interesting paradigm, especially if you look at it from the perspective of, having said that, most malware developers are going to come from only a few countries, of which the United States is one.
Yeah. Yeah, but even though we're one of those that create a lot of malware, it comes from us. Again, they're not as sophisticated.
Right.
It's not compared to Russia.
Right.
And you see a lot of sophistication coming out of there. And like I said, it's not like it's hard to read or understand, but it's more sophisticated with intent than it is in America. Why are we always not ahead of, like, leading the pack? Why are we always not ahead of the curve? And we're never seem to be advancing in a lot of in majority of anything. And I don't know if that has to do with something in America, but it's like we're never really ahead of the curve, especially in security. But that's with everything. We're never ahead of the curve. Like,
Yeah.
go
Please.
ahead.
Please.
And I was just gonna say, like, Japan, for reference, and technology, they are so far ahead of us. They, like, things we come out with, they've already had.
Yeah.
And we're looking like, oh, like this watch. Okay, they've already had that centuries ago.
Yeah.
And we're now just getting like, come on, man.
Well, it's actually really interesting, and that's an interesting point to make, because the fact that Russian organized crime almost 3 decades ago moved to including cybercrime, heavily moved to including cybercrime, and were actively going out and attacking people. The fact that the Chinese national government, yeah, I'm going to say it, actively goes through and pays organizations to go and attack other assets, other nations' assets. They're constantly evolving. And in both cases, so if you talk about Russia, they have a lot of neighbors that they don't mind cutting their teeth on. If you talk about China, they're in the same situation. The Chinese have no qualms attacking the Koreans first, Taiwan first, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, and that's what they openly do. And then once they get good, they come after the United States. If the United States were to become more advanced in its malicious capabilities, you would see the United States' security side wind up leading the pack a little better than what they do today. But I'll tell you, there is one alternative, and I have said this for a very long time. If Americans were smart, Americans in the security industry were smart, they would keep an eye as to exactly what is going on in the former Soviet bloc, what is going on in Turkey, what is going on in the countries that Russia is friendly with, such as, of course, Iran, and what is going on in China, as well as the countries that China feels aren't sovereign.
Yeah.
Feels are really part of China or has a lot of problems with. So again, Korea, because of course China included Korea, both Koreas, for a very, very, very long time. Vietnam, Cambodia, everyone really in that region. And of course, Japan. They have a real bone to pick with the Japanese. But but if you pay attention to what's going on there, you will see this, what will become the future security trends based on what will become the future security vulnerabilities and woes. Again, I point to ransomware. We can point to botnets. We can point to a whole bunch of different malware and vulnerability threats and tactics. And you will see this play out, because what is going on there in a few years will start going on here, as after they've cut their teeth, after they've honed their craft a little bit, they export it to the United States, they export it to the UK, to Germany, and so on and so forth. So if you're actually really smart and you want to know what the next big thing in malware or malicious trends and activities happens to be, don't look at the United States. Look at the former Soviet bloc. Look at their friends. Look at China and their frenemies. That's where you're going to see the trends, the next trends.
So basically, you basically would steal what they do or what they're doing. I mean, it's the same way you would get as a malware analyst. If you wanted to keep ahead of the curve, you create honeypots and then you still let them attack you, fool them into attack you to see their tricks.
Yeah.
See what new techniques they're using, or get a hand on their malware to see what techniques. But even then, by the time you've done that, they've already used something else. They're already onto something else, and it's crazy because I think a lot of states or different places they have different ways and creativity of thinking of how
Right.
they can, and they plan these, how they can, target America or other places. They have different ways to do that, and it's not like it's trivial. It's just like, wow, why didn't I think of that? Like, come on, like I said, botnets. You use it all the time. You use bots all the time. Okay, especially if you're an admin of some sort, you're going to want to do that because you have a lot of systems to take control of. I don't see why you wouldn't, but you want to. That's just streamlined, right? So attackers are doing the same thing. It's not nothing new, but they're using these thoughts like nobody's done this. So what if I did this and then did that? Would I get more money? Like ransomware. Like you could have thought of this years ago.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, what if I just encrypt all these persons' filed or this target's filed and then demand them to send me money? Now, maybe we didn't have Bitcoin all set up at that time. You talking about many, many years ago, but like still, that's nothing like crazy. It's not a crazy outside of the realm.
Yeah.
But it's just like I said, I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think America has any creative bone in its body, in my opinion. So, and that's where we get back to the white hat thing. Um, we talk about this all the time, and now I'm starting to see more people joke about being a white hat. So, what's the difference between a white hat and a black hat and a gray hat? Now, and I'm not talking about the difference in reference to what they do. I'm
Right.
talking about from their skill set. If you're a white hat hacker in the commercial world today, are you really good at security?
No.
And that goes back to them being script kiddies.
Yeah.
Right, and then also, like, again, to me, hacking, you get to express yourself, it's not just something that you go in and you just break stuff. You get to express you. That's why I think having a bunch of different cultures involved in that diversity in the field brings a lot of different, minds together and how they think, and you can, you know, come up with a solution, but because majority of the people in the industry doesn't have that creative thinking and they really don't really know how it works. They think they do. They think, oh, this is what attackers are doing. No, there's not. They're not. Unless you've actually went undercover or something or been doing it, how do you know? If you've never done it, how can you ever really say you are truly a hacker? Whatever that. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to tell anybody to go do any of this. I'm just saying that in order to be good at this, you've had to have done it and understand how they're thinking, in order to be good at it. Like how many times have you had people come in and say, "Oh yeah, I'm a hacker. I've been hacking. I just started hacking CTFs." Are CTF really um does they really give you a good standing point of what really happens in the real world?
No. CTFs are jokes.
But as you know, universities and other places say, yeah, if you're good at CTFs and you're one of the top hackers in the world, that doesn't make you a hacker. That just makes you good at playing games.
Right.
Anybody can go play Mortal Kombat and get really good at it and be top notch. But does that make you a good hacker? No, that doesn't. It just
Right.
teaches you how to play the game. But then when you actually get in the industry and you actually start doing these things, you start to notice that they're not what you thought it was. I did CTFs, but then I noticed that when I went and really did it, it was nowhere near CTFs. It's good to play the game. It's good to just be able to, practice some skills, but they don't give you the skill set you truly need in industry. And that's the same way with any industry, like any field. Software engineering doesn't matter. What you think you don't really know until you've actually done it.
Right. Yeah, yeah. There's definitely a lot of truth in that. There's definitely a lot of truth in that, and that's why again I encourage people to play responsibly, but play.
Yes.
If
And
you
play
have,
responsibly.
yeah,
Big word.
responsibly. If you've never played, then don't tell me you know security. Don't tell me you're good at it, and don't tell me you can do it because you actually aren't. You have no clue. And CTFs do not represent real life. I have never ever once seen in an environment that matched the kind of things you would see in a capture the flag engagement. Not once.
And you're not. I mean, and most people argue that's not the point. The point is that you get to practice your skills, but they're not realistic.
Right.
Okay, a lot of these things are old and out of date,
Yes.
and it doesn't make you a top hacker because you can hack a CTF. Like,
Right.
it doesn't make me a top gamer because I beat a few people in the chat room. As you start getting to people that are really, really, really good and really know their stuff, then you start to see how good you are. And as we talked about, people that are starting to come into hacking and thinking or into the field of information security, I should say, and say, "Hey, I just started a month ago. I'm a hacker." All right. So you just started a month ago. You finally get in the field. You get your title, and because you hacked 2 weeks or 2 months ago, you're this god. Nothing anybody says is going to change that. And then you have somebody like yourself who has 20 to 30 years over, anybody, have done it since you were a kid. And somebody like that could come and tell you because they had 2 months or probably had none and got a job or had the OSCP and hacked CTFs that they are better than you. And you've been doing this since you were in diapers.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. And this is why it really pisses me off about this community and with these white hat hackers or in all of this stuff. Like, it's just like everybody wants to, and this goes back to what we were talking about, and I can translate this back to the malware development. When people were developing malware, it's a competition.
Yeah.
We want to see who's the best. They don't care about learning and learning how to protect systems. They only care about who's the best. And in this field, that's not what we're here for. We're not here to see who's the best.
Yeah.
That's not what you hire. That's not what companies are hiring you for. Yeah, they want you to be the best in your field, but you're not here to compete with your teammates.
Right.
You're here to learn
Right.
and to get better and to grow and to protect other people. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, that's what they pay you for. They don't pay you to compete with your coworkers. And that's why we're never going to get anywhere. We're never going to get anywhere because we're so busy on trying to compete with each other instead of trying to learn from each other to get better. All right. That's why, and even now, hackers, like people who do like security researchers, they do research. They're afraid to put out their research
Right.
because somebody's going to use that without actually learning
Right.
and trying to use it for good and help people. They're going to use that, take that script, and go hack somebody. They don't give a crap about that. They just want to be the god hacker of the world. They want everybody to praise them and look down on them for being the best hacker in the world until they go to jail. Then you did all that for nothing. You got 30 to life for nothing. Just for a script. And you didn't even know how it worked. You didn't even know what it does. You didn't even know what it did. Just say, for instance, that you had somebody that doesn't know what it does. They take the script. They literally hurt millions of people. Didn't even know what it really did. Just ran it on a bunch of different systems. And boom. Now you're in jail for 30 to life and you don't even know what the script does. At least you could have known what it did.
Right. Right. Yeah. Magic. It was magic.
Yeah. Blue smoke, blue magic. And that's my problem with the community. Like I said, we could go for days on that, but it's just I don't understand it. And it doesn't resonate with the trends. It doesn't resonate with what's going in underground. It doesn't resonate at all. It doesn't meet, like I said, some of these terms I was just like, what is this? Like, why is this? What are you doing? Like it's like in order, and it goes back to who wants to be the most famous. You take a vulnerability that happened years ago, it was one name. Today, they change that and make it another name. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it is. It really is. So I'd like, if I may, I want to end with something that seems easier than it is. So over the many years, I have given a lot of training, and an integral part of that training has always been signs of a malware infection, and a section on signs of a malware infection. And I'll tell you, actually, a lot of people have come back to me. I have had a lot of people years later who would hunt me down just to thank me and say, my goodness, I really did not realize how useful those simple signs would be, but because of you, I was able to detect and stop an infection. And in many cases, they're massive infections in the entire organization. So we're not just talking about, oh, well, my home computer. We're talking about entire organizations. And I've had instances where it turned out that the organization had been infected for literal years. And this person had repeatedly, since training they'd been to of mine, they'd repeatedly told their IT staff and their security staff, and they kept getting told, no, we have anti-malware on all the systems. That can't be. You can't have an infection. And eventually, the individual coerced them, cajoled them into actually looking, and by golly, the system was infected. It had been infected for a long time. In fact, the entire organization had been infected, but their anti-malware was not properly updating its definitions and things of that nature. So I'd like if we could go through and let's just run through some signs of infection. And I'll get us started off on an easy one. So we mentioned that this malware, most malware is poorly written, right? So one of the biggest indicators is your system crashing, absolutely positively crashing, or suddenly being ridiculously slow, or your network being saturated just all the time, and you're sitting there browsing and everything else is so difficult and painful. And that comes down to knowing your computer, and that's something actually IT staff can't do. They can't do, and they really need to learn how to listen. And this is just general IT staff, not even talking security. General IT staff need to learn how to listen to users when a user is telling you that they're seeing odd behavior. If you are in IT, you need to listen and do some investigation. I'm going to step aside for a minute and let you go. What are some of and feel free to give some of the most obvious ones, and then some that are a little less obvious if you so desire.
Well, even going with freezing, with the freezing and crashes, and I'll say especially when your computer's running slow, you see that all the time, right? But a lot of IT staff or people don't understand, and I get people coming to me all the time that are not even IT people. They could be, my grandmother. They don't even know, hey, my computer is running really slowly. And then you look at their processes and you notice that their their CPU is spiking up to 100%, and they have all of these processes running. So you see that a lot. So I'll get into some more obvious thing, or not obvious, but things that you can look at. But like very obvious. If I start seeing a bunch of pop-ups and my browser starts to change, I know I set it to Google and it changes to something else I've never seen. That's an obvious sign that you've been hijacked. All right. If you get on your computer and you don't have anything running, and malware does this a lot, especially for startups, and you start seeing command prompts running all over the place. And I've seen that before. A person in being infected for a long time as a child, you see all of these different command things running in the background because it has to run. Right? Even when you start your computer, it's going to run. That's a startup. It's starting up to run. It's whatever its task may be. You start seeing that stuff. That's a big red sign that there's an issue here. You know, and most people don't really actually pay attention to that. So, um, other things that may not be also obvious that you may see if you said, like I said, your computer's running slow, you go into your process monitor, task monitor, or manager, and then you see all of these process running that are like not names that are common to you. Like if you know that you have like, let's say, let's give out a good one. What's a good one? Uh, I think it's SVC host, or you know
Right.
that you have that, but it's capitalized. That's not normal. Okay, maybe I don't even know, and I'm just a normal user. I would go look it up, see what it
Right.
actually does. Most people don't know what processes are running on their system, so they don't know what to look for, and that may not be obvious, which is why they have rootkits to try to hide these things. But if you see something suspicious like that in your task manager, more likely, if you're more technical, you're going to look at task manager. If you're not, then those few things that we gave you are good signs to look for. But if you are technical, then looking at your task manager could tell you a lot of different things, because you're going to see things. And most attackers, they put random things on the system without giving them good names. Nowadays, they kind of try to hijack the actual executable, so you won't know. But that's just some ideas. Even when you're going to install, And this happens all the time. People do not read the agreements.
Right.
You go to install a program like antivirus, like Avast or AVG, and then they have in that package that you don't even know the package has been hijacked, and they give you all of these things that give you spyware, adware, and you don't know that it's been hijacked. But you're installing all of these random things without actually paying attention to what it's being installed. People need to pay more attention to what they're installing on their system before they install it. One good thing to do to even check that is to use something like VirusTotal. I'm not saying it's gonna be the best, but it's running through millions of, antivirus picking up different signatures. Also looking at the behavior analysis, looking at what they give you, what behavior, what are they installing on your system ahead of time? Because a lot of times you can see if you're running it through a VirusTotal, what commands it's gonna run, what it's going to drop on your machine, where is it dropping it at? A lot of times in Windows, they're gonna drop in your app, what is your app local, and in your temp directory, gonna install those things there because nobody's gonna look there. Nobody's gonna know that's there, but that's where they'll install it. They could be dropping droppers, malicious things to get more malware. So first things first, always look at what you're installing before you install it. To just install it, pay attention to what you're installing. Look at what it do. Read those agreements so you know what it's going to install ahead of time. And if you're very cautious about it, then maybe, you know, upload that file to something like VirusTotal or Joe's Sandbox or all these different places. If you don't have your own malware sandbox, which you might not, do some further analysis to see what it's actually doing, and then that'll give you a good idea of what's really going on. And especially if it's installing things into your registry or your startup, command, any of that. So, or even actually adding task schedulers, that's normal, like, especially in Windows and maybe cron jobs in, Linux. You wanna check those things, but simple simple things. First, if it's me, check what you're installing on your system before you install, don't just install. 2, if you haven't done that and it already installed on your system, then, if your system is running really slow, which normally it shouldn't unless you have a sucky computer with less RAM, then you need to be monitoring what's running on your system and why is your system, especially if you have a 16 gigabyte gigabyte RAM in your computer, like an Alienware machine that's running at a high performance or a high performance computer at all. You need to be checking to see that because you know darn well that it shouldn't be running slow. If you have any ads or pop-ups, which you rarely see as much, but if you have any ads or pop-ups or something that's being installed, like malicious extensions, which are using extensions now to add to your browser, don't if you have that and you're seeing that, uninstall it. Know what you're installing. But if you see those type of things, you know that you've been hijacked and that you are infected, because that is the most common thing that most malware developers or hackers are trying to do to like get into your system. So literally, that's my thought. You want to always know rule number one: always know what you're installing in your system. Always pay attention to that.
Well, and if you know what you installed, then you know what to expect when you look in the task manager. If you have no clue, then you don't. Now, that is one of the problems if we're talking in a corporate environment. Of course, you have no control over what gets installed, unless, of course, you're IT. And honestly, a lot of corporate environments, they install just tons of junk. Or your computer comes with a lot of junk on it. In which case, actually, I always recommend people to go through and do a fresh installation of their operating system. Always,
Yeah.
always, always. I'll give some additional signs that I've seen. So this one's really obvious. It still does happen. It usually means someone's really screwing with you, and that's if your screen starts flipping. So if it flips this way or it flips that way, meaning I'm suddenly upside down or, everything's backwards, left to right wise. If your screen goes black a lot and you'll think you blinked, it'll just be black and then it's back and black and then it's back, or maybe it stays black for a little while. It used to be, and it still is oftentimes the case, that with a lot of malware, when they are, for example, hooking into your desktop so they can see exactly your display, exactly what you're seeing, that causes that blinking because it's not well written. If you get a lot of alerts from your antivirus and you're constantly cleaning up stuff, that's a real sign you've been infected. And do not assume that it has been cleaned by your antivirus. In fact, that's the worst thing you can do. We'll get to that in a second, but some other signs, if your hard drive's just chugging away, you hear your hard drive just going at it, your fans are just constantly at full speed trying to cool down your computer. Let's say you've cleaned out your fans. You tried cleaning your fans out because they do need cleaned out. You tried cleaning your fans out. Everything's nice and clean, but your system still seems to be getting really hot. It could very well be that you have rogue processes running in the background that happen to be consuming a lot of CPU or heavily utilizing your graphics processor unit or your hard drive or whatever. And so it's causing your system to get hot. If you find new software installed, a new browser has been set as your default or what have you, and things of that nature. But people really do actually need to be careful about those browser plugins, don't they?
Oh yeah, it definitely. Because a lot of these plugins, especially packages, third-party packages, are being hijacked.
Yeah,
That's the best way to get in. Like get into a system nowadays is to, do a third-party app or extension.
right.
Um, and to piggyback off of that, as you said, you may install this, not even know, but then if you start seeing errors in your browser, however, if it's hijacked, you'll notice because one, more than likely you're going to see errors, especially from a browser if they've already hijacked your browser and such. And it doesn't matter what application I've actually installed, it's going to, as I go back to number one, it's going to install other extensions to that. And it installed other extensions to my browser. This was a long, long time ago. Installed extensions to my browser, which called browser errors. It not only did that, it installed shortcut files on your desktop. All right. Normally does that. It also disables security. It
Mhm.
disabled my antivirus and other
Yep.
securities on my system. So, and then I just started getting these weird messages a while ago. So I
Yes.
knew, and then not only that, my system was running really slow from all of the applications I was using. So that's another thing you'll see what that goes into and tie into that. You have to be careful, and then that goes back to my number one thing. Make sure you understand what you're installing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're actually exactly right. When you start seeing a lot of weird errors in your logs, when you start seeing a lot of, let's say it's a web server and you see weird access requests to URLs that should not exist, uh, when your antivirus is screaming at you about malware or screaming at you that it's shut down, that your signatures are out of date, when Windows is telling you your antivirus or firewall is turned off, so on and so forth. All of these things should be really just obvious signs that you need to get your system checked out, because it could be you have a catastrophic hardware failure that's about to occur, or more likely, you've been grossly infected and you need to take it to a professional. And importantly, professionals need to learn how to listen and how to not immediately dismiss someone. That happens way too often.
And see, it's funny you said that because that what got me really into learning about hacking and malware and all of this stuff is because as a younger kid, I kept getting into like kept getting infected with a bunch of malware. Just doing things that a normal teenager would do, not even knowing these things. And then when I took it to my cousin, who was professional at doing this, he didn't listen to me at all. And he was more of a jerk than anything, and treated me like, well, you need to stop doing this and such, and you need to figure this out on your own. I
Yeah.
don't have time to figure it out for you. Like I'm coming to you for a service. I'm coming to you to help fix that, but also recommend things that you've seen that I shouldn't be doing or shouldn't do that keeps getting me infected. And see, a lot of people keep doing the same thing over and over and don't
Yeah.
know that they're doing it. And that's the reason why they keep getting infected. Like doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is insanity.
Yeah.
All right. So, everybody is a creature of habit. People are creature of habits. Like, they continue to do the same thing over and over, no matter what. So, yes, you're right. I think professionals need to learn how to listen. You know, people are coming to you for your expertise. You need to listen to what their issues is in order to solve their problem.
Yeah.
You know, and my philosophy is, as I think you heard me say this before, is the ALP: ask, listen, personalize, or you could add C, customization.
Right.
But that was always what I followed when people came to me. I would ask them what their problem is, listen to what their problem is, and then give my solution. So I can understand how to fix their problem. I mean, but that's the problem with our industry. We don't listen.
Yeah.
We think we know everything, and we treat the clients like crap.
Yeah. We're like doctors in that way.
Yeah, we know everything.
That's right.
We're not telling people to go hack. We're not telling people to do anything that we talked about in this segment. So if you do go and do this, we're not responsible or liable for whatever you've done. But I just wanted to say that we do not encourage doing anything criminal or doing anything that would be a crime. Okay, so we're just talking about experiences and trying to help people understand what's going on in the field, and hoping that people will take this knowledge and get better and become better and understand what's really going on, and not just looking from inside out. So we just wanted to get that disclaimer that we are not liable for anything anybody takes or take this information to do anything with. So I am Roniel,
I am DaRon.
and this is the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. Thank you for listening. Until the next time.
Have fun. Welcome to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. I'm DaRon.
And I'm Roniel. Took some time to get that out there, huh?
It did. It was tough. I had to think about it.
It's not as easy as it seems. It should be like really smooth off the tongue, but it kind of doesn't just go that smooth.
So terrible.
Oh my. This is awesome. Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to ask that question over again.
I was. I don't know what just happened.